For years, NoSleep readers have conversed amongst each other about the many stories that comprise the subreddit, with all of those conversations inevitably leading to two questions. What is your favorite story on NoSleep, and what is the best? One story has found its way onto both of those lists, and still today remains one of the most popular and successful tales to come from NoSleep overall. That story is Borrasca. C.K. Walker is an author and screenwriter from the Midwest, a prolific contributor to NoSleep who also wrote the undeniable classic Room 733. She is the rare example of someone who is able to use NoSleep as a launching pad, having been discovered by Mike Flanagan, director of such films as Oculus, Ouija, Origin of Evil, Dr. Sleep, as well as the critically acclaimed Netflix series The Haunting of Hill House and its sister series The Haunting of Bly Manor, for which C.K. Walker was hired as a writer. With the first installment posted on July 21st, 2015, Borrasca tells the story of Sam Walker as he recounts the downward spiral that becomes his life after his father uproots their family to Drisking, a small town in the Missouri Ozarks. The story was an instant hit on NoSleep, garnering, by the time of its archiving, 3.8 thousand upvotes and numerous awards. The story was unique to NoSleep for a few reasons. For one, it was posted during a time when clickbait titles were rampant, which if you listen to this show you've probably heard me comment on once or twice. Despite its one-word title, Borrasca managed to break through the torrent of more inviting titles, a task that has become increasingly difficult to accomplish. Borrasca was also written somewhat differently than most NoSleep entries of the time, because it hadn't yet become the nearly 15 million member community it is now, where authors deliver work of true professional quality. Many of the entries then were still written in the traditional Creepypasta style. Now that's not to say they weren't good. In fact, many of my favorite stories come from that time. What I mean is that it featured certain elements that existed specifically to give the story a more authentic feel, most notably the decision to forego traditional literary dialogue in favor of summaries of conversations and other communications. Borrasca read like a novel, a real, true-to-form novel, something that at that point was still a novelty on NoSleep. So too was Borrasca's length. In 2015, other top stories had an average word count of 3,116 words, whereas Part 1 of Borrasca boasted double that, with 7,338. This is all to say that given the time it was released, if it were any other story, Borrasca wouldn't have become the hit that it has. What made it stand out amongst its competitors was C.K. Walker's effortless delivery of a story that was easy to take in, but no less complex or engaging for it. As mentioned, Borrasca sees Sam Walker and his family move to the small Missouri town of Drisking after a vague incident with his father's job sees the police officer transferred. Once there, Sam learns of the local legend of Borrasca and the Skinned Men, both of which seem to revolve around a singular location, Triple Tree. Triple Tree is a tree on which rests a large tree house, and the tree itself is the spot where a local tradition takes place, the carving of names. A staggering amount of names are carved into the tree, and the tradition demands that an ominous rhyme be said before a person can ascend the tree and enter the tree house. Underneath the triple tree there is a man who waits for me, and should I go or should I stay, my fate's the same, either way. Eventually, Sam's sister Whitney goes missing. He learns that this isn't anything new in Drisking. Apparently, it's a somewhat regular occurrence for people to simply disappear, with the aforementioned local legends said to have something to do with it, but no one can really speculate as to what that something is. When Sam returns to Triple Tree, he sees his sister's name carved into its trunk. The rest of the story tells of Sam's adolescence and early adulthood as he copes with the disappearance of his sister and the violent result of his investigation into it in the years that follow. Some ideas for the dark, engrossing tale were inspired by the first season of HBO's True Detective, which if you've ever listened to me talk for more than 30 seconds, you know I consider to be the single best season of television ever produced, and is without parallel the single biggest inspiration on my own writing. Somewhere, right now, my girlfriend is rolling her eyes because I just said that exact sentence for the 1000th time. The line from True Detective to Borrasca is plainly visible, as each deals with themes of secretive groups existing and thriving in the margins of society, groups capable of and eager to commit atrocities against the most innocent of people, children. The story began with CK wanting to tell a story of a child in an isolated community, and while she didn't draw from any specific real-world incidents, in her words, quote, "The fact that these kids were also selling each other into sexual slavery was one of the most horrible real-world twists she could think of." Though Sam, Kimber, and Kyle dictated where the story went, CK had an ending in mind for the story when she began, and it was initially supposed to end with Part 4. However, as a gift to her fans who felt the original ending concluded the story on too dour a note, CK released a 5th part that offered slightly more hope. Borrasca has gone on to become a flagship series for NoSleep, and the talent it's comprised of achieving mainstream popularity. In May 2020, the first episode of a podcast based on Borrasca was released, a podcast that starred actor Cole Sprouse and was written in its entirety by C.K. Walker, featuring new story directions, characters, and themes. As mentioned, the story was discovered by filmmaker Mike Flanagan, an experience which has launched C.K. Walker into the world of screenwriting. To that end, C.K. has worked a team to bring Borrasca to the screen, which I can wholeheartedly say I will watch every moment of. With C.K. having been a writer on the utterly horrifying Hill House and its sister series Bly Manor, I would love to see what she could do with a story entirely her own. Without further ado, please allow me to introduce to you one of NoSleep's all-time greats, yet another of my biggest, earliest influence, the Dalek Emperor herself, C.K. Walker. And I'm here with C.K. Walker. How are you doing, Miss Walker?
Yeah, pretty good considering. I think that's what everybody says now. So yes, considering pretty good.
Glad to hear. That definitely is. People who are listening to this, you more than likely already know who C.K. Walker is, but if you don't, she goes by the Dalek Emperor on Reddit and is undoubtedly one of the most recognizable names in all of NoSleep. And she is the author of stories such as What the F is Going On in Pinal County, Arizona, Room 733, otherwise known as the Suicide Room, and the story we're here to talk about today, Borrasca. So yeah, you have quite the... I have to ask, actually, what's the story behind the Dalek Emperor? Where did that come from, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, so I got really into Doctor Who for a period. And okay. A Dalek is like an army of these. This is so nerdy now. Robots that he has to fight occasionally, and they had an emperor in one of the earlier than one of the David Tennant seasons. So I don't know. Maybe I thought it sounded cool. This was 2013. It was 7 years ago. Don't judge me.
I gotcha. Hey, I'm not casting aspersions at all. I am as big a nerd as you will ever meet. So. Oh,
excellent.
So, obviously, we're here to talk about Borrasca, but before we get into that, Borrasca is, I mean, without a doubt a horror story, so, and obviously you have built your career in horror, so I'm just kind of wondering, how did you get into the horror genre? Have you always been a fan, or was there one certain thing that made you be like, oh my gosh, I love this?
Yeah, I think it's like an always thing, because even as a kid, I loved like the R.L. Stine books. But more than that, it was the one type of movie my parents never let me watch, and that really made me mad. So, am I allowed to swear in this podcast? I should ask that.
Oh yeah, no, okay. Please go ahead.
That really pissed me off. So as soon as I got old enough to start, being able to sneak them or watch them, I became obsessed with them. So it's been most of my life. Yep.
So rebellion brought you
into
horror.
I know.
Do you have a favorite subgenre of horror that you like paranormal stuff, demons, cults, realistic, psychological, that sort of thing?
Man, that's hard. I don't think so. I kind of like I find supernatural horror harder to write for me, but I do find it scarier, I would say, than more grounded human horror. even though that's what I write. I think supernatural horror is terrifying because you can't fight something that's been around for hundreds of years and is imbued with godlike, powers. I just don't know how you can outsmart something like that. So I find it terrifying.
I definitely get that, and that's my problem with a lot of supernatural horror movies, because the way that they beat these entities just seems so far-fetched. And it really does seem like they should not have been able to do what they did to overcome this villain.
I totally agree. It's, Mike's movie Oculus was one where, I'm sorry about the spoilers, everybody, if you haven't seen it, but one where they don't beat it. And I was like, oh man, that is refreshing. Because it was still a really good and interesting story, but, it had an ending that I thought, oh yeah, that's probably what would happen.
For sure. And that's the movie that put me onto Mike Flanagan.
And
me
really
too. Put him on my radar. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
He's just amazing.
He is.
We will actually be touching on him a little bit later. What was the first story that you wrote? Or I should say, what was the first story you posted to NoSleep?
That was Betsy the Doll.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
For some reason, I don't know why I thought that was later in your...
No,
okay.
that was my very first one.
Wow, so you really came out with a heater there, I see.
I think that's what got me addicted to it.
Right, for sure. And it is. It's like once you do it once and you get a good response, it's hard to not go back.
It's like, oh, I figured out the formula. I can do this.
Exactly. And then you find out that there is no formula. There
is no formula. It's true.
So, Borrasca, where did that idea come from? What inspired the idea of Borrasca?
So I had spent a brief, less than a year living in a little town called Poplar Bluff, Missouri, which is in the Ozarks in southeast Missouri. And it's the town I lived in, I think it had maybe 40,000 people. I just found the whole area very creepy. The woods are very dense. No one really goes out into them, but no one talks about why. And this must just was a weird town or whatever, but anytime we were like, oh, this is a small town. There's mountains. Let's go do something. It was like, there was one lake that everybody went to, which was also called Crystal Lake, but that was all anybody really did out there. And I always found that really creepy. So then, 10 years later, when I was thinking about it, because I've never been able to get off, I was like, I want to write a new story. I've got these characters in mind, but where do I put it? I just kind of decided to use that setting, and the story kind of evolved from there.
That's awesome. Were there any outside inspirations aside from obviously the main one being where you live? The way you just described it is Drisking.
Yeah.
from what I can tell. But were there any shows, movies, books, anything that kind of influenced it a little bit?
Yeah, I think anybody that's read the story and seen the first season of True Detective can probably draw on some parallels there between Borrasca and Carcosa. And I did and I did really like True Detective season 1. I would have wanted to end it a little differently than they did, and maybe that's what I ended up doing in Borrasca. But yeah, I think that definitely had some influence on the tone and just a creepy place out in the woods. No one knows where it is, but it has a name. I just find that terrifying.
For sure. If I'm about to say something that my girlfriend has heard me say, no lie, probably over 100 times. I firmly believe that True Detective season 1 is the best standalone season of television ever produced.
It's wonderful.
It really is. Yeah. And if there's any one thing that influences any given piece that I write, it's that.
Yeah.
So I totally understand that being and there definitely are some parallels between Borrasca and True Detective season 1. So anybody listening to this, all three of you, if anybody has not seen True Detective season 1, do yourself a favor.
Yes. Definitely check it out.
So the characters, Sam, Kimber, Kyle, were they, how do I want to put this? Were they kind of reflections of you, or were they amalgamations of people you knew, or were they just completely ground up, brand new characters thought up in your head?
Well, yeah. So I had a kind of an interesting childhood, and I didn't have a whole lot of friends, but I did move around quite a bit for my dad's work. So I would say Sam is probably the closest character to me, and I definitely wrote him that way. I'm also more of not more of a follower than a leader, I guess would be one way to put it. And then as for Kyle and Kimber, they were probably the friends I would have wanted to have. I did later in life have many Kyles. I think everyone has had a Kyle as a friend.
Definitely.
Yeah. So that's kind of where those three came from.
Okay. So the writing process of Borrasca, did you, obviously you said you started off with the kind of the image of this town in your mind that you were very familiar with personally. But the later beats in the story and, the actual narrative, was that all planned out? Like, did you just kind of start typing or handwriting, however you do it, and just kind of let it all unfold itself?
Yeah. So I don't actually start writing a story until I've got dossiers on all of my main characters, until I know pretty much all the beats that I want. I might not know scene to scene where I'm going to go, but I just know the general like engine and momentum and thrust that I want to use to get there. So it was pretty well beaten out. All of the mysteries I had known fully from the beginning, how to solve them and how I was going to do that. And I know that different writers have different processes. This one works for me because when you do have a story, particularly a grounded one with a lot of mysteries like that, it's really fun to, as you write, kind of drop little tiny things in there that might on a re-listen or rewatch or reread, like hit a little differently, almost like an Easter egg. For instance, Kyle trying on his dad's suit for the funeral, and it doesn't fit him at all. Just like little stuff like that.
See, and that's always fascinating to me because I've probably, of all the authors I've interviewed, more of them have said that they're kind of, they're meticulous outliners and
Yes.
they, plan everything. And I, personally, I'm the complete opposite. And like you said, there's no wrong way to be doing it, obviously. Every writer's different. But for me, I can't really envision going down the road without actually taking the steps myself as I write the story. So I've always found that fascinating because I feel like I would be a better writer if I could learn how to outline. And I've always found that very interesting.
I don't see, and I don't know that that's true. And I think the reason is, one, as writers, we know sometimes characters do things you know what I mean? You have this plan and then you're like, wait a minute, this character that I've written wouldn't do that. And so sometimes they kind of make their own decisions. But also I had a meeting with somebody and they were talking about how Breaking Bad was actually more broken as a story the way you do it, where they didn't have huge, maybe they have some tent poles, but yeah, they were kind of like, okay, so what would happen next? They didn't, you know what I mean? I don't know. They basically broke it beat by beat, episode by episode. And that is one of the best shows out there. So there's no wrong way to do it for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually going back to something you just said, having characters do things you wouldn't expect, was there anything in those original outlines for Borrasca or, part of your original idea that didn't make it? Any turns the story was going to take? Any endings that didn't happen because of other things?
I don't actually think so. With Borrasca, I'd spent so long thinking about it that it pretty much went the way I wanted it to. There wasn't anything that didn't make it in that I wanted in. But I have adapted this story a couple of times since then and have added more stuff that I think is cool, that kind of fleshes out the story and makes it longer, that I wish I had thought of back then to put in the original story.
Right, yeah, I've had a couple things that I've written for different formats where I'll think of even something new and I'm like, man, I wish I would have had that for the original.
Yeah, yep, exactly.
So you posted the story over 4 days, correct?
Right.
And there were 4 parts, but as everyone will know, there are 5 parts to Borrasca. What's kind of the story behind that? Where did that 5th part come from?
So, yes, so part 4, or the end of the original story, ended a bit of a downer. Quite a downer, really. Yeah, Kimber got away, so there's that. And I had a lot, I don't even know what percentage of it, but a lot of people who felt like they wanted more justice and more of a little bit happier of an ending. And so I think it was probably 2 years later, I'm not even sure how much longer it was later, I decided that I didn't have anything in mind to write for the Christmas season, and that maybe as like a Christmas gift or whatever you want to call it, I would write a part 5, which is like vindication for Sam and Kyle and Kimber. And so I wrote it, and it ended up being longer than all 4 parts of the original story, which was interesting. And I posted it on Christmas Day. So, I get asked if it's, so to speak, canon. And it's if you want it to be. Yeah. If people liked it at the end of 4, then that's the end of the story. If they like 5, then that's the end of the story. It's kind of up to them.
Right. I was doing a little bit of stalking in my research for for this. And, I saw you had left a comment on some post regarding somebody had asked on the NoSleep Out of Character subreddit if they should read part 5. And you said that it's not for everybody. It's for the people that did want a happier ending. And
yes.
I liked that. I thought that was a diplomatic way of putting it, and I enjoyed that.
Oh, good. Okay. It's like a choose your own adventure.
Exactly. Yeah. You can either be super sad.
Yeah.
Or,
yes.
not be.
I think part 4 is the more realistic ending to how something like that might play out in real life, in a kind of a fantastical version of real life, but we're kind of living in that right now. So,
Oh, definitely. And this year, if nothing else, has shown that
yes.
you can never really know what to expect the world to throw at you.
Very true. Very true.
And I know for me personally, I do prefer part 4. I mean, part 5 is phenomenally written, as is all of your work, but the part 4, because of what you just said, it's more that's what I personally feel is the more realistic ending.
Yes.
Because things aren't always wrapped up nice with a bow.
Right. I agree. It's kind of like we were talking about with Oculus, sometimes the engine is bigger than the character, and there's not much you can do about that if you want it to stay kind of more grounded.
Yeah, which is even more fascinating to me with a story like Oculus, because it's so supernatural. And so to be able to get that, like that kind of ending that really kind of hits you like that is even all the more impressive to me.
I agree.
What was the reaction to Borrasca when you first posted it? Did it blow up? Did part 1 blow up immediately and was just like, was everybody demanding more? Was everybody commenting part 2 ? Like they always used to? Or did it sit for a while? I don't remember when it was actually posted.
Oh, right. I think it was posted in some November, but so I had written, the entire story had been written, and while I was writing, I made kind of like breaks in the story, wanted to write, because I knew based on the character limits of the subreddit and their rules about you can only post 1 story a day, that it was going to have to be broken up. So I could have done it in 3, but it felt more natural to do it in 4, like more organic for the story. So I had it all written. I had it all ready to go. I posted it. And I'm one of those people that likes to walk away. Like I can't just watch and see what happens that day. So then I didn't look at it again until I came back the next day, and it had done, I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure it had done really well for the time. This was back when there were, maybe there were 6 million instead of 12 million. I don't remember. It's a big subreddit now, but people did want part 2. So I got to post that, and then just kind of like over the 4 days. But what was really fun for me was being able to see people talk about it in real time and not know what was going to happen, even though I did. Because most stories you just dump them. I'm not a huge series writer on NoSleep. This had just happened to be so long that it was kind of forced that way. So it was neat for me to be able to see people talking about like, oh, but what's, do you think it's this? Do you think it's this? It was really fun. But I remember the response being good, particularly on the 4th part when everybody found out what happened and the comments just got really long in a kind of like book club discussion, which I loved and participated in.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, that's, for me at least personally, as a long-time contributor to NoSleep, that's my favorite part about NoSleep is the audience interaction or the reader interaction.
Yeah.
So, yeah, anything that invokes a discussion or that's my second favorite. My first favorite part is people really joining in character, like the NoSleep rules dictate, and kind of inserting themselves into the story. I love that. That is
very fun. You know what? That's true. I forgot that was a rule. I don't know if we followed that on the Borrasca comments, but I guess we would have had to. But they did get very deep. As in, there were a lot of comments on some of them, so it's hard to mod that.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, yeah. And I think at a point, moderators just kind of realize that the train has left the
Yeah,
station.
yeah, you're not going to stop it.
There's nothing
Just let it go.
Yeah. So you've written both supernatural slash paranormal and more grounded stories like Borrasca.
Mm-hmm.
And were there any NoSleep stories in particular that kind of got you into writing for NoSleep, or that kind of you drew from for any of your stories?
I would say not that I drew from, but the stories that got me in were, so this is awful because I can never remember the names of them, but there's a female writer, and she wrote one. I think it was the first one I ever read, and it was there was these famous murders from the 70s or 80s that happened at this not Girl Scout camp, but girls' summer camp, where it was just like a pile of bodies, of kid bodies, were found on this trail, and this writer had been like, I know what really happened, and basically wrote a fictional story around those murders, and I found it really creative and interesting. And then I read another one. I want to say it's called something about Emily, where this girl has a group of friends, and there's a fifth person in their group, but she can't see or hear. She thinks they're messing with her. It was again another. I just happened upon a bunch of really unique stuff that I really liked, and I had such a boring job back then that I would just sit almost all day at work and just read them, and I just got obsessed.
That sounds like a good job if you're into reading.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, obviously you've kind of cut your teeth with horror. Have you written in any other genres?
Yeah, I mean, back before I even started writing on NoSleep, I had been working on a novel. I mean, as every aspiring writer does. That's definitely more in the sci-fi fantasy area. I'd say I've been writing it at this point for 10 years, and I haven't looked at it in 4. But yeah, have I really written outside of that? Not really. Some of my stories can be quite kind of like saddle the line, but most of it's thriller, horror, murder mystery area.
And I feel like that line is blurred a lot anyways. Like,
it is.
Two people can watch the same movie, and one can come out of it saying it was straight up horror, another can say it was thriller, and they'll both be meaning the same thing.
True, and I think when we wrote Hill House and Bly to a certain degree as well, there was a lot of drama in there that had nothing to do with the horror, so that was fun to write.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and that was actually where I was going to go with it next. Borrasca obviously got you to the position that I feel every NoSleep writer before and after you is trying to attain, and it got you discovered by Mike Flanagan, who we mentioned earlier, and who I personally consider to be one of the modern masters of horror. He's one of the best in the game right now, personally. And how did that come about? How did his people reach out to you, or were you shopping stuff around at the time and it just got put on his desk, or?
Yeah, I've never shopped anything because it seems like such a far-fetched thing to get to, I suppose. And I'd always heard the whole thing like, it's amazing that anything ever gets made in Hollywood. And I had never even thought about screenwriting or working in the film industry, period. And if anything, I wanted to be an author and maybe have some stuff adapted or something like that. But no, I had a couple of stories optioned by some smaller production companies. And then Mike did some voiceover work for the NoSleep podcast on one of my stories, which was Borrasca. And he read it. Yeah. He played, he played Sam's dad. And I think Kate, his wife, played Sam's mom. Yeah, and he really liked the story. And my understanding is that he went through my kind of catalog of stories, and he liked my writing. And he optioned 2 of them. And then I got an email like a month later asking if he could have if he could call me, and I said sure. I thought it was going to be about option stuff. And no, he calls and he's like, actually, he's like, so I've got this show I'm doing with Netflix. Would you be able to come out and write it with me? And I was like, yeah, yeah, of course. So I didn't have to leave Phoenix for the interviews. I mean, I think I did Zoom or video interviews with the producers at Paramount and Netflix, and they signed off on me, even though I'd never written a screenplay in my life. So I packed up and went to LA.
That is an incredible story.
Yeah,
and
it's wild.
Like I said, I mean, that's inspiring to me, and I imagine everyone else trying to get to the position you're in.
I mean, and when it happens quick, because I think I was only in that room for a couple weeks before I was signed with an agency out here called WME. And then it was all uphill-ish from there. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Have you written or have you worked on any other major productions like that aside from Hill House and Bly Manor? That you can talk about? I mean, obviously.
Right. So I have written some film screenplays for features that are in various states of either production or deal making or sitting and waiting for something, which happens all the time.
Right.
And then I got Netflix over this past summer hired me to adapt a book for them to a show. So that is what I have been working on, and I'm not sure I'm allowed to say what it is yet, but it will, eventually it will come out. Yeah. And I have another. We'll just leave it there. I think that's. I'm working on a big budget podcast with David Goyer, who wrote some of the Nolan Batman movies. He could have written all three, actually, called Batman Unburied. So that's the room I'm currently in, which has been a lot of fun.
No kidding. I am a giant comic book fan.
You would get along well with this room, because it's mostly them talking deep cut Batman stuff and me being like, okay, I need to wiki some of this.
If you ever have any questions, I am a Batman encyclopedia.
Perfect.
I've been following keeping up with the updates for Batman Unburied, and
really?
I had no idea you were part of it. Yeah. I am so excited for that.
I think I'm there because I have written a big budget podcast before by myself, and also it's a dark take, as Batman usually is. So I'm not a bad person to have in that kind of room, but they definitely know everything about Batman.
Yeah.
It's wonderful
I can
to see.
imagine.
Yeah.
That's literally my dream.
Yeah.
So actually bringing it back around to that, you have written a big budget podcast, that being Borrasca. And how was writing that different from writing your original series?
So, because it's scripted audio, and this is just screenwriting or script writing in general, there's so much you can't do. You can't get into characters' heads most of the time in any script, and it's the same with podcasting. I had written some straight to script stuff for the NoSleep podcast and the Darkest Night podcast before, so I had gotten used to what you can and can't do, and what's really exciting for the listener and what kind of falls flat. So internal monologue is very boring, I think, in my opinion. So I don't do a whole lot of that, but that makes it even harder to get inside your character's head. So it was really, I got to do my favorite thing of all, which is writing dialogue. So it's basically, 500 and something pages of dialogue and sound effects. And it's really fun to write because I don't feel pressure to describe the room, or it's basically like this person's sitting in this seat of the car, this person's in this, and it was fun to be able to be like, well, I can stretch this out, I can add new stuff, I can add new characters, and when you know a story as well as I knew that story, because I'd already been adapting it into a full-length novel, it was super easy and fun to go in there and just play around with the characters and just try to write the most interesting and fun version of it that I could, for something as dark as it was.
Definitely. And I listened to it. I've listened to it twice all the way through. And
oh, wow.
It was fantastic, because I'm actually in the process of developing one of my No Sleep stories into a big budget podcast. So
that's amazing.
I've kind of been taking your work as, you know, the gold standard right now, because really nothing has come before it. So, and that's not to say it wouldn't still be the gold standard if there were 1,000 big budget no sleep podcasts, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, I will say I think most of the work that Q Code does, the company that did my podcast, is excellent. For the iHeart Podcast Awards this year, 3 of their shows, including mine, was nominated for Best Fictional Podcast. They do really good work there. That's a great, if you're looking to write a fiction podcast, I would look at some of those.
Okay, definitely. Yeah, because, I mean, obviously I'm familiar with Q Code because of yours, but I'll have to check out. I think they might have done one other no sleep story as a podcast.
They did the Left Right Game.
I can't remember which one. Left Right Game, that's what it was, yeah.
Yes.
That's incredible. What were some things you added to the podcast that weren't in the original story?
So I added something. Well, first I added the Borrasca parties. Those were not in the original story. I don't think. God, it's been so long. I don't think they were. Basically, that there would be a party. Were they? Now I'm sorry. Now I can't remember if they were or not. Either way, if they were, I expanded them quite a bit and added in like a creepy ceremony, like a bloodletting ceremony. And then I also, my favorite thing I added was the mile markers, which even in a podcast, I think is very creepy to think about. Very creepy. So I wish that I had remembered or thought of that back in the day. But yeah, that was my favorite thing that I think I added. And the framing device is kind of cool too. I like that.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Which was not my pitch. It was pitched to me and I was like, great, let's do it. So
yeah, no, and that worked out really well. I thought that facilitated the story really well, considering where the story goes.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, so that just seemed like a natural place from which to tell the story.
Well, and it was great because I could use it to pop out of what I thought would be boring for a listener. For instance, there's a scene in Borrasca where Jimmy is standing up on stage at a school auditorium and just like explaining the history of the town. And I was like, that's going to be very boring and, you know, without people asking questions. So I decided to jump out back into the present day and have Sam just do a really quick, and so we could add in dialogue back and forth with Leah about what the information that the listener needed to know. And then we pop right back in. And I think it worked. And so the framing was great for that.
Yeah, it allows exposition without being so glaring. Yeah.
Right. And boring again.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously anything you're writing, you don't want it to be boring. So
yeah.
Were there any limitations that came with developing. I can't talk. Yeah. Developing it to a different format. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's hard. I would say, you know, but you didn't get this in the original story either, but Borrasca has a lot of what I consider kind of cool cinematography. You know, it's fun to describe it in the story. It's difficult to describe it in the podcast. So I do feel like we lost some of the more purpley writing, the pretty kind of things that are short little half paragraphs, but that really like give you that, I can see that this tree and this dark gray cloud and the cold and all of this, you know, you don't want to lose too much momentum in a podcast describing, you know, exactly what a scene looks like, where I think you can get away with it more in prose.
Yeah, definitely. That makes perfect sense. So with that cinematography that I totally agree with in the original story, you painted such a clear picture of Drisking.
Thank you.
Are you looking to get it adapted further into, you know, for the screen?
Yeah. I mean, we're working on it right now. So we'll see what happens, but we're optimistic about it. So yeah, that's probably a more to come thing, but yes. Ultimately, gotcha. Yes, we are trying to get it to go for TV.
That's awesome. I will be the first to watch it, I promise you.
Thank you. Oh, that'd be great.
So we've pretty much covered everything there is to cover about Borrasca, at least as far as you can talk about. I just real quick wanted to touch on a couple of other stories you've written. One of which was, I think it may have been the first story I read on NoSleep, or it was very shortly thereafter. Room 733.
Yes.
Where did that come from?
Man, that's a good question. Some of these things don't really come from anywhere. I think, sometimes you'll just get a weird thought in your head about, for me, a lot of times it just comes from having like a creepy sentence, and I think for 733, it might have been that this room that they thought they were next door to the whole time, they were actually inside of the whole time. I also wrote that story set on the college campus that I went to, which was Northern Arizona University, and the building, the dorm that they lived in was called O'Reilly, and it was 7 floors, and there was a suicide room in there and another building. I think, college campuses always have creepy, like someone was murdered in that room, or someone committed suicide, or that room had a seance, stuff like that. So it kind of all came together pretty organically. I think it's got a lot of tropes in it that people like, that are kind of easy to write. So yeah, that kind of just came from like my experience at college and like what would have made that actually creepy, like a suicide room. So, yeah. Because always every college campus has one, and it's always like a broom closet now or something. So, yeah. Yep.
So what I've gathered from this conversation so far is that you are a resident, or were at one point, of Arizona, which actually brings me into my next question. What the fuck is going on in Pinal County, Arizona? Can you please tell us the story about Pinal County, Arizona? That's
kind of a wild story. Yeah, I was living in Phoenix at the time, and a lot of the more prolific writers on NoSleep were friends. The ones that wrote, every week or something like that were friends. And I think you remember, and maybe they're still doing this, there used to be collaborations. So at the time, what was going on? There was some sort of pandemic fears, which I know that's like hat on a hat now, but it was something, but small ones for, I don't know, was like bubonic plague. I don't remember what it was, but something was in the news a lot. And we thought we would capitalize on it. Like, let's all write, like scary illness stories. So we all wrote one, and I don't remember if we staggered the postings or whatever, but for whatever reason, Pinal County did, like, that ended up being the main one. And because of NoSleep's rules about having to pretend it's real, all the other writers in the project started commenting on mine, being like, yeah, no, I have an aunt that lives there, or whatever, because it was Mammoth, Arizona, that it was happening in. And so that begat more people playing along until it got onto the front page of Reddit. And I think that one got like 2,000, 3,000 comments deep. It was kind of insane. And then because people, I guess, were saying, well, I called such and such gas station and nothing happened. I put it, and it was like, whoever you're talking to, that's not us. We don't know those people, just like random fun stuff. And then here's the funny part. So what happened was some people in Tucson, I guess, decided to try and drive over to Mammoth because it's not that far, to like just really get a look around for fun. But if I recall this correctly, a plane had ended up crash landing on the only highway into Mammoth the same day. So they were turned around at a blockade because of the plane crash, which only perpetuated the story more. And then I thought that was all fun and games until the next day I was literally getting ready for work with the news on, and it's a news story on in Phoenix. And I'm like, holy crap. And then my dad sent me a clipping. It was a news story in USA Today as well. And then the local Tucson, one of their news organizations, tried to call me and interview me. And I said, I'll do it by email, but I'm too embarrassed to do it in the studio. Because it did cause the town. I think some of the people living in Mammoth thought it was funny, and some were annoyed. And I did feel really bad about that.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's so amazing.
It's so funny. I know.
It really is hilarious. So as far as NoSleep goes, do you have any stories that didn't take off that you wish would have gotten more attention?
I do. I have a few. I thought Blue Ridge underperformed, and what was the other one? Oh my God. The Lake Cagachante also underperformed, in my opinion. I thought both of those stories would be much bigger than they were, and they weren't.
Yeah, which goes back to you never know the formula.
You never know. You never know what's going to hit and what's not. Yeah.
Yeah, no sleep is such a fickle beast.
It really is. Yes.
Are you still writing for No Sleep?
I'm not. I am not because there's some question, and this is probably good for any No Sleep writers to be aware of. If you post your stories on No Sleep, Condé Nast technically owns them. So when someone wants to option something of yours, they might be put off by the legal complications. So I would just, that's why I stopped posting stories on Reddit. So I don't, I would just say other writers should know that going in, but that's why I don't write there anymore.
And do you still, I mean, I know that you're obviously, I'm sure, very busy working on, screenplays and shows with, shows with your career in LA. Are you still writing short fiction? I mean, even if you're not posting it to No Sleep, are you still writing short horror?
No, I really should be. I have so many ideas, but I don't. I feel a part of it is being busy, even in the pandemic, and part of it is because writing is now my job. It's the only way I make money. I like to kind of try to put those creative outlets into the most career-oriented things I can. Not that I haven't thought about it. I just haven't. I think the last short story I wrote was Whitefall, which I wrote for the No Sleep podcast, but that originated as a short story that never got posted anywhere.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that makes perfect sense. I mean, yeah, you want to put everything you've got into the thing that's guaranteed to get you somewhere. Yeah. No,
yeah, and I actually
makes perfect sense.
Really like screenwriting now. I'm not sure about more, but I really it's different and it's challenging and it's got such a cool payoff. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, and that's actually how I got started writing. When I was like 13 years old, I bought a book from Barnes & Noble called How to Write a Selling Screenplay. Because, I was 13 and I was, imagining big things. And that was where I got started. And that's where my true love lies, is in screenwriting. So
that's amazing.
Yeah. So that's very cool. What can we, I guess we already kind of touched on what we can expect from you moving forward.
Yeah. I think there will be more to talk about at the end of next month or maybe the beginning of February.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. So yeah, things are coming along, which is interesting because the whole industry is kind of shut down due to COVID. Now I just saw yesterday that the state of California is trying to urge films to close production. But that means there's a lot of development. It's a development heavy, I think, period. So
yeah,
a lot of writing, because what else can we do?
I was going to say that would be good for writers if no one else.
Yeah.
Obviously a huge blow to the industry as a whole, but if you have to be anybody in it as a writer, yeah.
Yeah, but then, there might come a time when they're like backlogged. They're like, oh, we got too much to produce now. We don't need writers for a while. Who knows? Right,
yeah, it might be a trade-off. Yeah, that's a good point.
Right, exactly.
All right, well, I think we have pretty much covered everything that I had to cover. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about, or is there anywhere you want to direct people who want to check out your work?
Yeah, well, I do have a website, which is ck-walker.com. That's, I would say if you haven't seen His House on Netflix, it's excellent. I had nothing to do with it, but I watched it and it was terrifying. It was a really good horror movie. So that's the only shout out I would give, is just Netflix recommendations.
Right. I actually watched the trailer for that like 10 minutes before getting on this call with you.
Oh, really?
I was considering watching it.
Very scary. Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
All right. I think I might have to, when we're done here, I might have to go do that.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Miss Walker.
Absolutely.
It has truly been a pleasure. It was awesome talking to you. I have been a fan of yours for so long. So I know for all the people who will be listening to this, they will love it, but I Love it more than all of them, I promise you.
Oh, thank you. That's amazing.
Of course, yeah. So you take care and stay safe, and I look forward to everything you will be working on in the future.
You as well. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. You take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.